Hello. Can't hear me? Doing it. Oh, hi Siddharth. Finally, yeah, you see me. Sup, folks. We'll be waiting for some more minutes and then we'll be beginning with our first session, which is actually our intern panel from Hackout.
Hello, is my video and audio clear? Voice test, audio test, video test. Looks clear enough. Yes.
Can you see me again? How to call?
Uh, yeah, your voice is perfect. Video res is a little low.
Is it okay, like, durable?
Yeah, 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 we can work with it, I
We can
guess.
start with this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Cool, folks. So we'll be beginning in like 2 minutes with our handout intern panel. We'll be having some interns from handout how they built something at Hackout last year and what they're gonna do this year organizing Hackout. Yeah.
Folks, in the meanwhile, just spam this link everywhere. This session is going to be very useful for people who are looking for internships, uh, people in college applying to different companies. Just spam this link in your college groups, in your batch groups. We want more people to take benefit out of this. And we have 10 live audience members right now. Let's take it to 20. Baby steps. Let's take it to 20 first. We can work from there. Come on, we can do this. 20 is doable.
Also, folks, please keep liking the stream so more people get to view this. Also, do subscribe to our channel so you get all the latest updates. All right, so we'll be beginning with our intern panel now. So, first of all, I want to welcome every one of you to our speaker sessions at Hackout 2021. We are like an annual hackathon which is hosted by Headout, and we'll be beginning with our speaker sessions now. We had a Valorant stream yesterday, and also, yeah, tune in to 9 p.m. for Valorant finals also. So, yeah, I'll be bringing in all of our interns right now.
What up, folks? What up, folks?
Yeah,
Garvit, Kunal, Anurag, Kushi.
Hello.
How are
yeah.
you folks doing?
Good,
Good.
good.
Good, good.
Good. Yeah,
Looking
good.
sharp, everyone. Looking sharp. Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right, so everyone, I want you all to introduce yourselves first, beginning with Garvit, and we'll be moving to everyone. And let's go, Garvit. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey everyone, I'm Gaurav Chittada. I'm a third year undergraduate student at Triple IT Allahabad, and right now I'm doing internship at Headout since Jan 21.
Anurag,
Okay. I'll.
let's go. Yeah, yeah. Anurag, let's go with you next.
All right. Hi everyone. I'm Anurag Patil. I'm from D.R. Patil College of Engineering from Navi Mumbai, the same as Neil and Kunal over here. And I'm currently as an intern in the backend team at Headout. I started my internship in January 2021 as well.
Cool. Great to have you here, Anurag. Let's move on to Kunal. Kunal, introduce yourself now.
Hey guys, I'm Kunal. I'm working with the product team here at Headout. I joined Headout in June this year, and it's been an amazing ride since then. Yeah, happy to be on the stream.
Amazing. And finally, our final panel member for the day, Kushi.
Hi, I'm Kushi. I'm a visual communication student. I'm in my last year, and like I joined like
Mm,
5 to 6 months ago, and it's been like really good, especially working on. I told your Wi-Fi isn't working.
yep.
I think we'll be fine with that.
Okay, cool.
Awesome, folks. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks for those introductions. Pretty sure our audience members now have a better idea of who we are talking to. And so, uh, these are our star interns, folks.
Oh,
These people have been driving their teams. They've been enthusiasm in their team, and they've been doing some great work that we're going to talk about today. Let's start off. To start off, I would just like to ask a very simple question about how did you get this internship, right? How did you land your feet inside Head Out? So let's start with Anurag. Anurag, what's your story?
Yeah, so Neil being my senior, he already got his internship at Headout. He started working in the front end team, and he told me, Kunal, and other two folks from my college. One is Ayush Singh, and there is Ayush Dongre as well. Ayush Singh is also currently working as a front end intern in Headout. So he told us about Hackout last year, and then we were like participating in the Hackout. We had no idea that like we were just casually attending the hackathon like every other hackathon that we attend. And yeah, we won the second prize for the Hackout 2020, and then we got an internship opportunity, interview opportunity to apply as an intern. And yeah, here we are. So fun story about Kunal, like he actually applied for a backend intern, but he'll tell you more about that later.
yeah.
Cool, awesome. So yeah, another intern who joined in via Hackout. Uh, let's move on to Garvit, who has a slightly different story, I believe. Garvit,
Uh,
over to you, man.
no, like I also get through Hackout only on Hackout Discord server. They have posted like intern, like the seat for the intern, and through that I joined. Like our technical society emailed us about Hackout, and you also work at Ekansh is our senior who work at Headout. Yep.
Cool, awesome. Let's move on to Kunal then. Kunal is probably the first product intern that Hidout has ever hired. And so let's hear Kunal's story. Yeah.
Yeah, so as Anurag has pretty evidently told us about how we got in via Hackout, so we made this project known as Ketsuro, and that gave me an interview here for a backend intern. I pretty bombed the interview pretty, so it wasn't a great interview as such. But yeah, that gave me confidence that I wanted to pursue product more, and that's how I reapplied few months later. And here I am working as a product intern at Headout.
Cool, cool, cool. We've all been there, man. Bombed interviews, that's just part of the process. Uh, cool, then. Let's move on to Kushi. Kushi, what's your story? How did you get to head out?
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, 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 we can
So,
hear you.
Yep.
okay, cool. So, how I came across Hackout was through LinkedIn. So one of my friends was already interning at like various places. So he was going. How I came across the LinkedIn profile. Then I checked out what all stuff you guys have done, and I've heard it from a few people that I've worked earlier.
Cool.
So yeah, that's how just I sent a email to Rohan.
Cool, cool, cool. Awesome, awesome. After that first question, I'm just gonna do a bit of audience interaction. Okay, we have 13 people now, so we increase the watching from 10 to 13. Our aim is to go to 20 in the next 10 minutes. Baby steps, folks. Baby steps. We'll get to 20 pretty quickly. Just spam this YouTube link everywhere that you can. We're going to have a really awesome conversation with these interns of ours, and awesome. Let's move on. Then let's move on to our next question. Um, I would just love to know how has your intern experience been so far, right? So, what are some preconceptions that you had that were broken? What are some things that you saw, not just related to your work, but in general? So, let's start with Kunal this time, since Kunal is going to have a different story. So, yeah, Kunal, what?
So yeah, basically when I joined Headout, we were experimenting with different problem statements, mainly in driving convergence and growth. So since I joined, I've been able to execute more than 20 A/B experiments on Headout and the microband size that we have. A pretty interesting project that I worked was. Wherein just changing a CTA copy gave us a 12% bump in convergence, which was an astronomical thing to for me because it was something key little things can drive impact that is like very immeasurable. So that's when I realized key product copy is something that you should be very particular about. And yeah, that's something I've been looking to replicate and reiterate and go along doing more such kind of projects and ship some good things here at Headout.
That's pretty awesome that you're a product intern and you're already shipping features live. That sounds great. Moving on to Anurag then. Anurag, what about you? How has your experience been?
Well, talking about misconception, like the first thing that every programmer or every engineer has to worry about is data structures and competitive programming. The very first interview of my life, which was at Hadout, Nishan took it, and there were data structures and algorithm problems in that interview, but and I was pretty terrible at those. But given the fact that I'm still in Hadout and I landed the internship, that having the knowledge of data structures and computer programming is not a deal breaking thing. You should have overall knowledge, and I think Nishant judged me based on that. Like the other parts of the interview were pretty good, only the CP part was a really terrible experience. So yeah, that was the first misconception that was broken. The other thing was that intern usually get to work on very small amount of projects and very minimal projects which don't impact the company a lot. So at Headout, I was able to take opportunities where like, and ownership opportunities so that I could have a bigger impact at the entire company. So in my a very recent project, what I did was so we have our operations team So in that particular project, within the span of 20 days, I was able to reduce their working, like the time that they spend in their work, to around 300 hours. Like whatever this time they would have spent doing an X thing, I reduced that by 300 hours in just amount of 20 days. So that was a pretty big deal for me. I cannot go in much detail, but yeah, this like having a bigger impact on the entire flow is a really really good experience. There was also one thing where I solved a very major tech debt, and like we usually work with this semantic versioning for our projects, for our deployments. So the, I had a very huge bump in that particular version, which made me very excited to work on the next projects I had out.
Amazing, amazing. So basically, just 20 days in, and you were already able to, reduce the workload for the operations team by 300 hours. That's pretty amazing, and should must be practically unheard of in the, like, in people of your age. So that's pretty amazing. I guess we lost Karvit. He should be back in a while. We'll move on to Kushi then. Kushi, how has your experience been in the design team?
My experience with design team has been actually pretty good because like when I started, I was a part of media ops, but I had an interest in illustrations and like brand designing and everything. So first I'll go to the like first I met Rohan here
Folks is
and new.
everyone else also, yeah, is Kushi's voice breaking for everyone else as well?
Yeah, yeah, it is.
Okay,
Am I
so
back?
everyone can, yeah, rejoin with a better network. Meanwhile, is Gavit here? Okay, cool. It will take a couple of minutes for Gavit to join back. Yeah, that's right, Bhagat. We need offline conferences, man. It's been too long. It's been too long since we've been stuck in this setup. But we have 17 watchers now, so we are making steady progress. Just three more, and we'll be to our target of 20. And of course, we'll increase the ceiling then. But then let's get to 20 first. Come on, like the stream, increase the watching to 20. Um,
Also subscribe if you
yeah,
haven't already.
That's
yeah.
important. Yeah.
Cool then. While Khushi and Garvit join back, uh, Anurag has already talked about a couple of projects that he has worked on. Kunal has done the same. Uh, can you folks talk about how your intern experiences have been, different from some of your peers working at other places? So I remember when I was interning at Headout, my experiences used to be like very different, and I wasn't able to understand my peers' experiences, and they weren't able to understand my experiences because they were world apart. Uh, have you folks faced the same thing, Anurag?
Yeah. So think about deadlines. Deadlines haunt everyone. But my managers have been very very lenient with me regarding the deadlines. They understand that college is also equally important. At the same time, they also know we are getting a lot of blockers and a lot of small ad hoc tasks. And Rachit, to be particular, like our relationship has been like very very informal at times. We usually play video games together. So and there are my peers like Alpesh and Ravi, and everyone has been like a big brother to me, and not a stranger who is a colleague at a office who just have a very formal relationship. Like you have to do this, please complete this by this time, and not have any kind of fun. I had a few friends who have been interning at several other big firms, and not like a very established firms like Nvidia or some other company. They were like they are given a deadline, they are given a thing to do, and yeah, that's it. They have to do that, and they have these scheduled calls that they have to follow, and like a very very, what do you say, like a very office like environment. But here at Headout, I feel like I'm at home and not at office. So yeah, like very friendly atmosphere so far, and I hope like that as we grow, because usually the more the company grows, the more formal you have to become. But I don't think that will happen with the people that we have at Headout. So yeah, it's a very warm atmosphere around me.
Yeah, really well said. Basically, I could resonate with everything that you were saying. So basically, this feeling of oneness, this feeling of basically working on similar ideas, similar problem statements together with people, feels like we're in a large hackathon throughout the year, right? Anyway, Garvit is back with us,
Yeah.
and Garvit, how have your hackathon experiences been in the past? How was your hackout experience in any other hackathon that you might have attended?
Yeah, the Hackout experience. Hackout was our first hackathon. Uh, we had a great learning experience. We have shipped like a, a, application which is similar to Goodreads. Basically, in that we have created a AI system which recommends us the book that we want to read uh, by other like by other sources that we are getting data from different APIs and all. Yep, and at Headout also, like the kind of ownership that we were given in like the different projects that we do, that is great. Like uh, I don't think like we get like any such type of ownership anywhere else in the industry.
Right. That's quite true. Kunal, I have a question for you. So basically, I know some people who want to get into product really early into their careers, right? But product is generally a field where people either work in engineering as a developer for some time and then shift to product and things like that. What would you suggest, and what do you think worked for you to get into product as quickly as you did?
Yeah, so there were like two tipping points here. So first thing being, you have to work on shipping real projects, and have an angle to your project that gives you a product outlook to your project that you are building. So let's say you are building a to-do app. So it would be great if you can you can index on thinking, ki, how can I get more users out of it? How can I make it a more fluider experience for people, and how can I ship it to thousands of people and not just my 10 friends? So that is a great way to craft your product sense. And shipping real products, interacting with real users, talking to your friends, talking to your peers, and getting feedback on your project is something that will help you build that. Next thing being reading up a lot, because this is a very vast thing to explore. So reading many books, understanding models is something that worked for me. So yeah, if you're like trying to break into product, best way is to ship your way through it yourself.
That is so true. Like I keep talking about how you should like keep building products and not projects, and take your like build projects. Like you can do that with your hackathon projects. That's the best example for like anyone building out there. Like take your hackathon projects to your next level. Like keep getting users, market it well, and show your product off, man. That matters a lot.
Totally, totally.
That's actually pretty good advice, that don't leave your hackathon projects after the hackathon is done, right? Like try to take it to the next level, try to ship it out. Yeah, that's actually good advice. Oh, we are at 19 audience members right now, folks, just one less than our target. We are going to get to 20. Come on, we should do that, should be able to do that. Cool. Khushi is back. Hopefully we will be able to.
Yeah,
Yeah,
hopefully, because
yeah.
I'm not sure how long I will stay.
No, that's okay. We'll try. We'll try. So, Kushi,
Yeah.
want to talk about Hackcat?
Yeah, definitely. Like
Yeah.
it was one of the most interesting things that I've done at Head Out till now. Yeah, definitely. Because like so how I got into this was ki Siddharth Jha, the one who was like working with us. So he actually texted me, "Are you interested in illustrations and stuff?" And I'm like, "Yeah, definitely," because I was like, "Yeah, let's do something new." And then I talked to everyone over here, and they were like, we had an issue that we had to create a mascot, right? And we didn't know if we're gonna go with a cat or we're gonna go with something else or like some other animal or some other creature as well. So like we collaborated a lot. We had so many discussions about what we're gonna do, then what the features are going to be, because we didn't want something very simple and we didn't want something very complex, because it should be easily available and it should be like uske be variations, and like the variations that should created should also be pretty easy to see and to like, and of course the aesthetic we had to keep in mind given the color palette that we use. So we had a lot of variations with the cats and how it will look, the gestures the cat will have, and etc etc. So yes, it was a pretty cool experience, and I like think I'll talk about it later again. But that's all I'll reveal till now
Yeah. Let's not.
about the hacker. Yeah, let's not go into the deep thing.
Yes. So basically,
Yeah.
folks, Hackad is a very interesting endeavor that we've undertaken this year, and we're just super excited to reveal it. But we're just holding
Yeah.
ourselves back.
Yeah,
We'll
it's
do it.
very difficult to not talk about it.
Yeah. All in due time. All in due time. Not a problem.
Yes.
Cool then. I'm just gonna quickly check. Folks,
Vikram.
congratulations. We have 20 audience members. I am so happy right now. Amazing. Next target 30. I know you folks are gonna kill me, but come on, we can do it. Spam the link. Spam the link.
By the way, yeah, we are also live on Twitter. So if you go to Hackout.io on Twitter, you will be able to see the live stream on Twitter as well.
Amazing. By my boomer self came to know about Twitter Live just yesterday when we were discussing about this, and man, amazing. Cool. What else? Neil, you want to talk about your intern experience? I mean, it wasn't
Right.
long
So,
ago when we were interns, right?
man, I have an amazing story to talk about. So, the first day, like, I joined it out at December 9th, 2019. Yeah. So, I go to office. Those were the pre-COVID days, right? So, I go to office. I see someone over there, thoda aage baitha tha. Someone was there. I didn't recognize him at first, and then like we have a room called a stand-up room where we like have a like daily stand-ups and stuff. So I went over there. This guy walks in. I see Eka and Shu. I have like met at hackathons like all year around, and he actually messages me on Facebook saying, "Bhai, tu hi hai kya? Like, are you literally at the head out office?" And that's actually how we became work buddies also. So we had met previously at which hackathon was that?
Yeah, and then
At
hack in the north.
Noor, and also the one at Triple IT Allahabad, Hack in the North. So yeah, we became friends through that, and like now we are work friends, and yeah, we are hosting an event together live. That's awesome. So like about my internship experience, actually, it was I don't think I can get a better culture from like better than Head Out. So yeah, I had really cool projects I've been working on, and currently I'm handling our apps over here, and I keep taking up front end projects also. So as our apps are in React Native, we'll be like experimenting with something called React Native Web, where we can actually have common components across our web and app code bases. We didn't use Flutter actually. We had experimented with it, but it didn't work very well for us. And yeah, that's something about our app tech stacks, but like we can talk about it later whenever we want to. So yeah, I've had very cool projects during my internships. I've worked on our entire AMP infrastructure. I've like brought up a React Native app. Migrations have been done, and like apart from that, I've been working on combos and our rebrand, which was done recently. So yeah.
Cool. The most funniest thing about our encounter in the head out office for the first time is that I texted you on Facebook, "Ki, is that you?" Instead of just walking up to you and
Yeah,
controlling. So yeah,
that's
there's that.
amazing.
Yes. So basically, folks, if you have any questions, just put it in the chat and we'll try to answer. We're about to wind up with this session, and so if you have any questions, anything that you want to ask any of the panel members, any of the hosts, feel free to drop your questions in the chat, and we'll take them up. This is a good start to the Hackout sessions. Yeah, I mean, glorious day in Bangalore. I don't know if you folks can see behind me. It's a great sunny day, and yeah, just very happy, very looking, very excited for the day ahead.
We have so many cool speaker sessions planned.
Yep, yep.
So excited for them.
And the next speaker session, Bhagat is already in the backstage. We're just going to bring him live, put him on live in a bit. Oh, he's here.
What's up, Bhagat? Where are you now?
Yeah, got me there. Hi guys, what's up?
So basically, this is Bhagat's second stint as a speaker at Hackout.
Yeah,
Bhagat was here last year as well, and I remember his talk was one of the most loved talks from a participant's perspective. I remember people coming up to me and asking me, ki, "Hey, can you help us connect with Bhagat?" And would love to talk to him and all those things. So
nice,
yeah, yeah,
nice.
yeah.
Thank you. Yeah,
And I remember we were at In Out, right? And you spoke over there. That was an offline hackathon, by the way, at that time. And we were blown away by your talk and your illustrations of the whole talk. And it was so engaging. And like we couldn't move our eyes away from the screen. Like
thank
you
you.
probably were the first speaker to get that kind of an attention from us.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I just really wanted to, capture the essence of what I had gone through my college life and really, put it out for anybody else who was coming in and had any problems and all of that. So yeah.
Yeah. That's pretty nice. So, folks, I'm gonna introduce Bhagat. He is an iOS engineer at PhonePe, and he is like a contributor at Ray Vandelich. So, do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, sure. Uh, so I've been working at PhonePe for quite some time now. I think it's 2.5 years and going. There we are revolutionizing digital payments across India, cashless payments with UPI, with wallets, with credit card, debit cards, all of that stuff. At Raven, like I've been mostly involved in iOS tutorials, authoring them, editing them, and recently I am also authoring a book on Git, so that might hit the shelves soon. I think as soon as next month. So yeah, that's pretty much that's been going on.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And what are you gonna talk about today?
So today I'm going to be talking about how we at PhonePe, manage the scale that we are at. You know, how do we manage the application? And this is just from an iOS perspective, and which can be applied to, Android and React natives of the world and all of that. So today is going to be about a perspective into how we manage apps at PhonePe for a scale that we are at. So I think PhonePe was the first company UPI app to hit 1 billion transactions, UPI transactions. So yeah, so we're going to be talking about scale today. Yeah.
All right. So you can share your screen, and we'll begin with the talk.
Yeah,
Let's
sure.
go.
Yes. This is visible, right? I think so.
It's not
It's
visible.
not.
Yeah.
Um, is it yet?
1 second. Yeah.
I think, yeah. Is it full screen right now?
Yeah. Cool. Cool. Yeah. Good to go.
We're good to go, right? Okay, cool. So today we're going to be talking about modularizing applications for scale. And you've already heard of this. I'm an iOS engineer at PhonePe and a contributor at Ravenadic, so I'll just skip this part through. So the story starts somewhere around in 2016, where PhonePe was as basic as this app, where you could just send money, receive money. You can split a bill here, and you have a couple of handy recharge and bill pay options, right? So PhonePe is and was leveraging UPI, which is Unified Payments Interface, which is regulated by the Government of India to offer a safe and secure way of transacting across mobile devices in a cashless way, right? It includes use cases like P2P, electricity, data card recharge, landline recharge, gas recharges, all of that. And PhonePe was using these use cases as their bare bones first app, right? But if you look at PhonePe today, it is evolved and evolved in a very heavy way. You can see a lot of categories like, credit card bills, book a cylinder, rent payments. You can see insurance and investment on the bottom. So it has really divulged into, you know, greater than 40 use cases, which obviously excludes the Switch platform, because Switch platform is another big use case with uh, hundreds and thousands of mini use cases, right? So we're going to be looking at a transition from what made the left app the right app, right? It seems like magic at first, but it is not, because it is the hard work of over 5 years involving 70 plus developers working hard every day, to improve the product. A story 8,000 plus commits. I know it sounds a lot. It is a lot. And almost 130 versions for our iOS app. And 48K is a very, very, very big number to manage for anybody, right? And there were obviously added complexities in our code base due to scale, uh, which was React Native, apps, having third-party frameworks, having Kotlin, which we recently added as a support for that, and having code kind of makes you somewhere, because it actually introduces a lot of problems for new people as well as for old people building the project, setting up the project, and all of that, right? And there are actually a boatload of, right? So the first problem that we're going to talk about are merge requests. So merge requests are like this on the final day of merging, because everybody is, trying to get through that door. Everybody is trying to get their MR merged. Everybody is trying to get their code in the main branch. So which results in merging of at-par code because of time restrictions, and mostly it is not acceptable at a later stage because it turns out to degrade the health of your app in a later run, which in evidently requires you to rewrite a feature, which is a big no. Reverting changes is the second problem. Uh, this has happened to me a lot, a lot of times. I'm sure it must have happened to you folks a lot of time, but nobody wants to have a hell of Friday, right? Uh, you don't want to revert your code on a Friday. So there is this release manager and the guy who's reverting the code, and you don't want to those guys on a Friday, right? Merge conflicts. So merge conflicts are a big, big headache, because you actually don't know who did it. I mean, you know who did it, but uh, you don't know the context of who did it and why they did it. You don't want to break, of course, anything, and you just want your project to compile, right? Which in turn leads to choked CI machines. Uh, when one of the guys breaks something, all of these guys have to wait for their pipelines to pick up, run, and which may or may not fail because of one guy's failure, right? And everyone is waiting. They're just waiting, when our pipelines will get picked, when our merge requests will get accepted, all of that. And finally, release delays. So, release delays are a big no, because we as developers don't understand what are the implications of a release delay, because we are most of the times agnostic of the consequences. But Sometimes business and PR have, done some print media PR, or some television PR, which doesn't even allow such kind of mistakes to happen, right? So yeah, and they just want it out there. So they don't care if the padding is 8 pixels off. They just want it out there. So things had to work efficiently, and there were four problems that we were solving. Like getting the essence of these problems and condensing them into four major use cases that we were solving. So the first was release at any time possible. You should be able to release at any given time possible, whether it is a feature train, whether it is a bug fix train, whether it is hot fix train, right? Your code should be as independent as much as possible. You shouldn't rely on people as to like when they'll get their code merged, I'll get my code merged. Nothing of that sort. You should be able to roll back easy. For example, if you are 10 commits deep into something and that doesn't work out, and if it is merged, you want to make sure that you roll back it very easily. And of course, faster release cycles. Everybody wants that, right? So the concept we came up with was a train, right? So train as a concept is not new, but it is renewed and realigned with our vision of what we see ourselves as a company, and our priorities, our deadlines, and our shipping paradigms. So there would be two trains a month of 15 days time, right? So it would be 7 days of dev and 7 days of QA, which gives equal amount of time to dev and to QA to carry out their respective work, right? So uh, the basic rule to implement a train is to have strict timelines, because everything goes out the window if you just don't do that, right? And one more reason to have strict timelines is because everything except your work is a train behind you. So, for example, if you're working on a feature to show users favorites, right? So everything from UX to design to the backend to the APIs that are powering that should be done uh, a train before, ideally, so that you can pick your feature in isolation and you can work on it, right? So everything that has to be done to power that feature except your work has to be done before that. Then only you go ahead and pick that feature. And obviously that includes UX, backend design, everything. So this gives me enough time to get everything done, right? And God forbid, if you cannot catch this train, and some features are not, small or small enough to get in one train and something like that. If not, you can always catch the next one, because the next one is just 15 days away, right? So there are some timelines for it, and assuming that November 1st is a Monday, you get about 5 days of dev time. Then you skip 2 days. Then November 8th is again a Monday. Then you have feature testing for the feature that was done during these 5 days. On November 11th, you can go for integration testing, and 12th you can go live, right? So there are a lot of things happening parallelly in this. For example, as we discussed before, everything has to be available before. So backend APIs are available on staging. The first day you start your dev. Uh, November 5th should be the last day to raise your MRs, because that way the QA team is well versed to allocate their bandwidth and to spread out their work in such a way that everything gets through the train. Uh, in the middle of the train, you can have a product and design acceptance while people are doing QA. And on the last day of the feature testing, you have to finish off code reviews. You have to get the QA sign off. Backend should be on production. The code is frozen for any more merge requests. And if there is a very big feature going live, for example, a chat of some sort, or something like a breaking flow, that should go to beta if possible, right? So we release our apps in percentages. We don't blow it out to 100% as soon as we get it approved from the App Store. So those are in increments of 1%, 5%, then 10%, 20, 50, and then 100, right? By the time we move the app to 100%, uh, we already have another one ready because of the train system, right? So 12th we went live. I think 13th, let's say on 13th it got approved. 7 days we have uh, to get our app to 100% to monitor crashes, all of that. And by the time the 7 days are over, we already have our app ready. So that means we're always shipping, right? No matter what the time is, no matter what the deadlines are, we're always shipping. So most of you would be like, yeah, we have this at our company, and just tell me, what do you do in code, right? Because that's what you spend your whole day doing. So the first thing to accomplish is to divide user flows into teams, and the teams are called pods here. So basically, if I'm working, if there's a product use case, if there's a user use case of, having mutual fund as a category and having some very fast growing mutual fund as a category. So mutual fund team should handle that, right? Uh, and in the similar way, there is a term life insurance coming up in the insurance category. So the insurance team should handle that, and that makes sense, right? So when we rode out to divide our teams, there were a lot of teams, right? And this is not even the tip of the iceberg. You don't even know how many teams that we have. Uh, so they are all independent teams which work on independent focus of user use cases, right? Some of them are P2P, sending and receiving money, bill pays, switch platform, insurance, mutual funds, offline payments, and all that. So when you divide these up, you give and get full ownership with respect to people of, you know, the code of that project, the timelines of that project, the features of that project, and the testing effort of that project. So all of these uh, provide an accountability, we can say, for every four of these things, and people know where it is going wrong, right? So we divided them using CocoaPods. For those who don't know, CocoaPods is a dependency manager for iOS projects. It uses Ruby under the hood, but let's talk about later. Let's talk about it later at some other point. But CocoaPods is a dependency manager, something like an npm, or you can say a pip, for same references across platforms, right? Uh, so what happens is when we divide them using CocoaPods, right? So every project is one dependency. So the main app is just a shell which powers the smaller projects to give them what they want. For example, when you log in, it just tells it you're logged in. When we access location, it just tells, here you go, this is a location, right? So this is just a shell which just powers smaller shells, or you can say smaller projects across the hood. So pods have a version number against them, and I'm sure every dependency manager has a version number against it, right? So the power of having custom dependencies is just like, for example, this mutual fund pods you see, right? It is at 1.0.3. When I have a stable release of mutual funds, everything works fine, right? I just increment that to 1.0.4, right? And then it points to the next release of mutual funds, correct? So it is just as easy as to do this, to having new code into your app. Uh, so these are microservices. We used to call them pods, but we prefer to call them microservices in code because they take care of uh, they make their own business decisions as well as their technical decisions, in obviously align with the whole company, uh, that what architecture to follow, what stack to use, and all of that. But they make their own decisions in based on how to do it and when to do it and stuff like that. They also take care of their own databases, network, and UX. They have dedicated UX engineers who focus primarily on improving the UX of that particular pod, right? The upsides of this are you can have your own timelines, you control your own code. So you can ship whenever you want to, you can ship whenever you don't want to, right? You control the code, you control the versioning, right? No more merge conflicts because you are doing work primarily in your own pod, in your own microservice, rather than, like fiddling with the whole app. Uh, So this way there are no more merge conflicts, and at least interport, because there might be some case that you have a dependency from other microservices or something. So in this way there are no conflicts, at least interport, right? You can run tests for your own pod. You can just verify the sanity of your own pod by running tests for it independently without running the whole app, without building the whole app. So you can publish individual metrics for your own little microservice that, see, like this mutual funds is 99% test, has 99% test coverage. So if something is going wrong, it's not mutual funds, right? And basically you're just working in a sandbox, which gives you many advantages. Like you can run your microservice independently, you can save on build time, and build times are a lot in huge projects. Every build taking from around 4 to 5 minutes average. So instead of spending that time, people not having attention span, wandering off to Twitter, you can just focus on this. Gives you about 10-20 seconds of build time, so you can focus more on the work, right? uh, the best part is you always have a working shipping ready copy of code. So the mutual funds example that we saw, if I bumped up the version to 1.0.3, sorry, 1.0.4, I always have a shipping ready 1.0.3 which was tested, which was regressed. So I can just bump it down and I get a rollback, right? Smaller code reviews are a lot smaller because you're just working in your own shell. People don't have to ask you for context, so that just gets thing done faster, right? uh, as a developer, you don't have to deal with all the shenanigans that come with project setup and all of that. You just have to worry about creating the best user experience possible, and that's what we want to focus at, right? It is scalable, tried, tried and tested, right? Uh, we're a 30 plus dev team for iOS, working on 40 plus use cases. 40 plus would be like a lot more than 40 now. And since we've already divided the code into submodules or subpod or microservices or pod, whatever you want to call them, frameworks, uh, we have a business app, right? We can always use the existing code from our main app into the business app again, just like that, right? Uh, of course, with the help of configs, we can decide a certain look and feel on that, uh, which actually is a really good way to go forward because you can, turn on and turn off color features and all of that. It gives you cross app stability because it has been regressed many times over. Um, so you can depend upon that. If it's working here, it should be working there, right? The only dependency that we have is something like a common code or central repo of common stuff. Every app depends on it, regardless of your architecture, regardless of your stack, regardless of your, uh, the mobile app or web app or something like that. Regardless of anything, every app depends on some common code. Get screen width, get screen height, something like that. Correct. So it is a central repo of common stuff. That is the only thing which is a dependency, right? And the only instruction to developers is don't introduce breaking changes in the common utility that we have. That way it breaks it for everybody, and that is not a good sight to have on the CI, right? So This was a small story of how we went from left to right. It is obviously the daily striving effort of hundreds of engineers out there who continue every day to make PhonePe better, faster, reliable for our users. A cognizant effort of 5 years, around 250 million plus users. Last I checked, around 10 minutes back, it was 150,000 users per minute only on iOS. 3 billion plus app sessions across both platforms, 1 billion plus UPI transactions done till date, and the first one to do so. Uh, and we're just starting out. So yeah, that was it. I thank you very much for listening out to me. Uh, Below is my Twitter handle. If you have anything to question, if you have any advice to look out for, there it is. Feel free to contact me, and I'll be passing it over now.
Hey Bhagat, that was a nice talk. We gained a lot from that. It was interesting
Thank
how
you.
you explained how you have broken down like teams at as pods and stuff.
Yep.
So yeah, we'll be moving over to some questions that our chat has been uh,
Yep.
asking. So
Yeah.
Vikram asked how and when will PhonePe actually move to crypto and experiment something about it.
I'm not sure on that. I think before crypto, we have a lot of use cases to tackle in house. Uh, Something like maybe stockbroking or something like that. So that makes much of Indian use case rather than crypto. And also the crypto market, I think, is very small right now. But, like the apps are coming up, CoinDCX and WazirX and all of that. But still, people are skeptical about crypto to some extent, to a great extent actually. Like it is more or less a gamble for people. If you just try to listen to them peacefully on Twitter or something, it's a gamble for it. Like people perceive it as a gamble, and uh, till I think till that stretches out into a wider horizon, because PhonePe is all about reliability, right? Your money is not going anywhere. You won't get something and all of that. So I think crypto is on the far horizon right now. Yeah.
Right. Cool. And the next question he asked is how many distinct products does PhonePe actually have, like both internal and external?
I don't actually have a count on that, but the last I checked, we were almost everywhere, and you know, virtually any use case you can imagine with, like you can imagine paying for, right? It was mobile recharges, data card recharges, internet recharges, water utility bills, insurance products, mutual fund products, uh, paying to a QR was always there. So I think it's virtually everywhere. And with the Switch platform that we have, I think, well over 200 merchants with us. Merchants like Daily Objects, Phones and Petals, all of that. Oven Story for food, KFC, Swiggy, Pizza Hut, all of that. So you can just go into the Switch platform, and without having to install those apps, you can just uh, play out with those apps in PhonePe itself. So that's a pretty cool thing. Ola is one of them. Yeah. So
So
yeah.
interesting that you mentioned like Switch. The whole thing of Switch operates on the a web view, right?
No. So it is a. I think it is a PWA or a React app. It is not a web experience. It. Yeah. So for people who just want to save some space on their phone, it works like a charm. Yeah. And there are great discounts running every time also. So yeah, check that. We're spending money on that.
Cool, cool.
Yeah.
The next question by Rachit is while building a feature, if you realize some upstream pieces need a rework, for example, some design element which was missed during the planning phase, does the whole cycle reset in that case?
No, Rajat. So the cycle is fixed whether you catch that train or you don't, whether you find out that, oh, the A to the B was missing, the cycle does not reset. The cycle moves on for everybody else. You may want to back out of that cycle, right? You may want to catch the next cycle, but the cycle does not reset in any scenario. It is always the people who back out of that cycle, like, we are not shipping this in this cycle, right? Or we'll just ship it in next to next thing or whatever, because this was missed. Like, there is a declaration, this was missed from back end and front end, whatever. So we'll be moving it in the next cycle. So that is that. The cycle does not reset. Yes.
Awesome, awesome. Thanks for answering all of our questions, Bhagat.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon. We probably might have an AMA session with all our speakers on Discord. So, like,
Okay.
do join our Discord community. The link is in the description below. Yeah.
Yep. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks. So, yeah, Ekansh.
Man, that was such an amazing talk.
Yeah,
Bhagat never fails to surprise. Uh, cool then. We have our next speaker here with us on the backstage. So, folks, we'll just give a quick intro and then we'll put him on live. The next speaker is John Skeet, who's actually a staff developer relations engineer at Google, and he's been there for quite some time. And so I'm sure he'll have a lot to talk about. He's giving a talk titled Finding Art in Code, which sounds super exciting to me. I'm super excited for this talk and waiting to hear what John has to say. Um, can we see John? John, can you please turn on your camera?
I've got my camera on, but I have multiple cameras. If I can work out a way for it to tell me which camera it's using, that would be good. Yeah, I don't see any UI to change which camera is being used, and I've got about 3 in this.
Not a problem. So basically, you must be seeing that gear icon, right? Just below the
just
window
on
in
the
blue
right
screen.
to the plus. Oh, just on the right to the share screen thing.
Yeah, there's a video input option there.
All right. Yeah.
There we go.
See you.
Awesome, amazing. Hey, John, how are you?
Hey, not so bad, thank you. Not so bad. I will just check that it's also using the right audio input.
For sure.
This
We
is
can.
one of the, I've recently been developing software for our local church for the AV setup, and that means that I've got more audio and video inputs and outputs than anyone can count.
Right.
And
Right.
random streaming things always choose random devices, but there we go.
For sure. Oh, we can see and hear you perfectly now. So all's good.
Great.
Where are you currently now?
So I'm in Reading. So I'm currently in my shed in the back garden of my home. I work remotely and was mostly working remotely even before the pandemic, but now sort of officially remotely. So this is in Reading, which is just to the west of London.
That's awesome.
Cool. So basically, most people had a tough time adjusting to the remote work setup, myself and Neil included. But I guess it should have been a very smooth transition for you because you had been doing that anyway.
Absolutely, yes. It's at some point I will need to go into the office to go to my desk to pick up the many books that I've got there, which frankly I hadn't been reading anyway. So I will need to basically transfer them from my desk to storage at some point. But I haven't been asked to do so yet because I think there are still relatively few people going into the office, so desk space is not at the premium just now. But I'm sure sometime in 2022 I will need to.
For sure. Just a note for our audience members, folks, don't forget to like the stream, subscribe to our channel, spam the link everywhere. We want more people to hear from John, and he's going to start in a bit. Come on, let's do a bit.
So yeah, John, you've been like a staff DevRel engineer for quite a while at Google now. Like,
So I've only been a staff developer and developer relations engineer for a couple of years. I was a software engineer, then senior, then staff software engineer. So I've been at Google for 13 and a half years now. And in my current general role for probably the last 5 years, something like that. So I look after, or I'm part of the team looking after the .NET client libraries for Google Cloud Platform.
awesome. So for the people who don't know what a developer relations engineer does, could you explain and give some context to them?
Sure, and it's going to be different for different companies. Just like, so the term product manager means such a different set of things in different companies, and so does developer relations. So I'm probably more on the product side than some developer relations engineers. So some of DevRel go, and particularly developer advocates will spend a lot of time with customers, spend a lot of time doing conferences, building samples, building Twitch channels, YouTube channels, etc. A lot of content on that front. I don't do much of that. I do a fair amount of speaking for user groups and conferences and things, but very rarely, or relatively rarely, on Google products. I mostly talk about things like we're going to talk about today, finding art in code, and things that I've been doing personally, and C# and things. So developer advocates will be doing a lot of the customer facing one-on-one and conferencey kind of things. I do interact with customers and love doing so, whether that's on Stack Overflow or on GitHub. So pretty much everything I do is open source, which is lovely. And obviously, if someone has an issue, they can raise an issue on GitHub, and we try to respond really quickly and hopefully helpfully. But most of my time is spent building not even writing the code for the libraries that we ship, but managing the generation of those libraries. So it sounds like something that you do once and then you're done, but there are ever-changing requirements in terms of how we support authentication, so that is handwritten code, how we handle the idea of, well, you've got an API that you're writing a library for. How do you manage the API team wants to introduce a new feature, but they want it to go through a public preview first, where they can still tinker with the API, so it doesn't guarantee to be stable yet, may not perform very well yet, but we want to get customer feedback. How do we manage that from a library perspective? Can we generate different libraries for preview and not preview, etc.? So some of that I work on across multiple languages. Some of that I'm just on .NET. But basically, if it's around client libraries for Google Cloud Platform, I would be involved somewhere in the whole process. And it's a pretty complex area by the time you've got managing documentation and hundreds of APIs. Being able to scale that up so that we don't need hundreds of engineers to manage those libraries can be quite tricky, whilst making the libraries as nice as they possibly can be. It's fairly easy to pump out a rubbish library that just is, this is exactly what your RPC API has to offer, and there's nothing beyond the bare stubs. We've been putting a lot of effort into how can we make this more usable, finding common patterns, and then governing. I'm involved in API design governance, so that APIs within Google Cloud and beyond, but within Google, increasingly follow a set of patterns, and then those patterns can be codified, and that makes things a better experience. So if you've got a large set of resources and you've got a list operation which lists them in a paginated way, well, okay, for one thing, it's good to have that consistency of this is always how we do pagination. But then if you can put that into client libraries so that the caller, if they just want to iterate over all the results, they don't need to know that it's making multiple RPCs in the background. Or maybe they say, well, I want to do it I want to display this in a paginated way. So you've got to sort of tweak things a little bit. So if you're always wanting to display 25, maybe that will be one RPC getting 20 and one RPC getting 5, but we help to make it smoother and do that once so that we avoid customers having to do it all the time. So yeah, that was a very long answer to what do I do.
That was very insightful, actually, and very much in depth. Like, that was interesting. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. So, yeah, let's begin with your talk. You can like present your screen, and
Yep.
I'll put it up on the stream.
There we go.
Here we go. Yep. Here we are. We can see you, and you can begin.
Excellent. Okay, so in order to be slightly less distracting, let me just zoom my camera in a bit. I already had. Sorry, that's just so that you don't see the cats. I have cats. They are lovely, but they can get a bit distracting if they're on the shed back there. Anyway, so today the talk has a couple of different titles. Either Sondheim Sora software or finding art in code or something aligned to that. I'll come on to exactly what we'll be talking about in a minute. But first, a quick message. I give this at the start of all my talks these days about being kind. And if I have time, I often give it at the end. I am sure you are all kind people, but sometimes we just need an extra little nudge. So if you have some annoying interaction with someone later on today, just try to bear in mind, be kind. Hopefully that message can just nudge the needle a tiny bit. And if I could choose between making people better software engineers or making people slightly more kind, I would choose slightly more kind every day of the week. This is genuinely a slide. This is the first slide of the actual presentation. White, a blank page or canvas. The challenge to bring order to the whole through design, composition, tension, balance, light, and harmony. Those are the opening lines to a musical called Sunday in the Park with George by Stephen Sondheim and James Lapine. And this talk is partly about that. And I should warn you right now that there may be singing. There will be occasional little bits of singing. I do have a reasonable singing voice, but I find it difficult when I'm within a talk to get the right pitch, etc. So just as a warning, it may not sound great today. As well as talking about the musical, which I'll come back to in a minute, this talk is also about a Sunday afternoon on the island of La Grande Jatte. This is a painting by Georges Seurat, who lived between 1859 and 1891. The painting took 2 years to paint between 1884 and 1886. And it's a huge painting. It's 3 meters by 2 meters, which is about the size of the wall that I'm looking at here in my shed. I haven't yet seen this in person. I was hoping to last September. I even had tickets to fly out to Chicago, where I was going to go for work, and the painting is currently in the Art Institute in Chicago. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, obviously that didn't happen, but one day maybe I'll see it. It's possibly the most famous example of pointillism, which doesn't necessarily mean, it's sometimes misinterpreted as just tiny dots, but these are small brush strokes. So there can be lines, there can be dots, all kinds of small brush strokes. And over time, Seurat played with fewer and fewer colors on his palette. And he even had rules about he couldn't use 2 colors that were next to each other on the palette to be next to each other on the painting. But it's largely about playing with light. So I'll talk later on about exactly what Seurat was trying to do with light, but it's all very experimental. So was the musical, A Sunday in the Park with George. This is by one of my favorite composers. No, absolutely my favorite composer of Broadway musicals, Stephen Sondheim. And it came out 100 years later with themes of art and community and connection between people and work and life, but it is a fictionalized account of George Seurat. It is not actually intended to mimic his real life. I'm mostly interested in Sondheim, although James Lapine is brilliant as well. I would say my experience of this musical at the moment is through recordings. I haven't seen it live. I've watched a video of it, but I haven't seen it live. I was hoping to, just like I was going to see the painting last year, I was going to see a production in London last year, and then it got moved to this year, and then it got delayed who knows how long. So I am hoping to see that at some point in the future, but I haven't yet. However, it came out in the 80s. It's by now fairly old as musicals go. And just like the painting, it was really experimental. It started off off-Broadway, as things tend to, at a theatre called Playwrights Horizons, just for 25 shows. And the second act of the musical, so the second half, was only present in the final 3 of those performances, which I find amazing. Clearly very experimental. There's one song, Finishing the Hat, which when Mandy Patinkin first sang on stage in a paid-for performance, he was singing with the script in front of him because it's such a detailed song, and it had been introduced during the run, that they thought, okay, well, it's better to have it in the show, but have Mandy Patinkin actually reading it as he sang, rather than not have it. So lots to experiment with. I'm not going to go into the full detail of the plot because I've found over time that it takes a very long time to, I go down rat holes of explaining the plot, but I will go very, very high level. It's in 2 halves. The first half is set in the 19th century with Georges Seurat, the painter, and his girlfriend Dot, and it's while he's painting the picture. George is obsessive. Dot gets frustrated and goes off and marries Louis the baker after conceiving a daughter with Georges. There are lots of other characters, and it sort of culminates in the painting itself, composed of people, actors. There are various layers of representation here. We've got an actor at the culmination is moving other actors around the stage so that the end result looks like a picture that supposedly that actor's character painted, although it is fictionalized as well. So there's, if you look at sort of myth and reality going on here, there's lots to play with. The second half of the show is about Georges' great-grandson and his grandmother. So his grandmother is Georges Seurat's daughter, Marie, and the great-grandson is also called George, which gets quite confusing, and it's sort of deliberately confusing. It's a let's lay 2 things on top of each other, because the actor who plays Georges in the first half plays George in the second half, and the actor who plays Dot in the first half plays Marie in the second half. So you get this sort of weird cross generation thing. And as well as the actors repeating, and all the actors who played character parts in the first half also play character parts in the second half, and a lot of the music is repeated as well. Sometimes this can be somewhat subtle. When Mandy Patinkin was at a party with Stephen Sondheim, Sondheim said, "Oh, I'm sorry that I've given you the same songs twice." And Mandy Patinkin said, I don't know what you mean. And Sondheim said, well, as an example, there's Finishing the Hat and Putting It Together. They're basically the same song. You've just got one note missing from the end of each phrase in Putting It Together. And Mandy Patinkin was mind blown by this, apparently, I hear. So it can be quite subtle, but really artistically done. I've mentioned Mandy Patinkin a few times here. So he played George. Bernadette Peters, famous Broadway actor, played Dot and Marie. Mandy Patinkin, you may well know, without knowing that you know him, he was Inigo Montoya in The Princess Bride. So think, you killed my father, prepare to die. And that's Mandy Patinkin, who played George and George. Okay, so that's the musical. I've talked a bit about the painting. What on earth does this have to do with software? Well, that's what we're going to explore today. And we're going to talk in terms of art and craft and engineering. How do these interact? How do we define them? How do they relate to the musical and to what we do in software? Well, let's start by trying to kind of define these things. So here is another painting by another artist called Joan Miró. And this is from 1963, and it's called Lune Vent. And I love it. I have one of these in my hallway, and if I just move my camera a little, you can see two more Miros over there, and you may or may not be able to see, other things get in the way, but I've got a couple over there as well. I love Miro, but I don't really know why. And that's sort of part of art. I don't have the terminology or the education to know exactly what it is I love about Miro paintings. I do know that I love the 60s pictures more than those that come later. He's more famous for ones in the 70s and very, very early 80s before his sad death. I've seen his landscapes from the sort of 40s and 50s, and they're very impressive as well. But it's these slightly abstract ones that, without the heaviness of the 70s, that I really love. There's just something that's really vibrant about them. Now, I could try to paint something like, these are actually etchings, I believe, rather than paintings as such, but I could try to do something like that. I could sort of swoosh a bit and swoosh another bit and then flick some ink, and it might look, it would be reminiscent of Miro, but I suspect it wouldn't be good, and I don't think it would be art. So when we come back to software, what kind of code is art? I'm going to give one example. Hopefully many of you are .NET folks. There is an API in .NET called Link to XML, which is the most beautiful XML API I've used personally. Much better than the previous ones in .NET, better than the Java ones I've used before. But it sounds terrible at its first description. It's got all kinds of conversions all over the place, some implicit, some explicit, and sort of addition operators, adding a namespace and a string to get a fully qualified name, and things that sound just really weird to start with. And then you try using it, and it's beautiful. It really is so elegant. That is a work of art to me. It's worth exploring whether art has to be novel in software. I think this is where it's slightly different to fine art. So in fine art, you really do want some new ideas to come through. And I have my own thoughts around the ideas in the painting that you can see here. You may well have your own, but there's ideas, there's feelings, and some, if you look at something that's the same as another one, it's not so, doesn't feel so good. Within software, there is a different sort of beauty that doesn't have to be as novel. You can have beautiful user interfaces, and I'm not talking about sort of are the pixels themselves laid out prettily, but beauty in terms of the way that you engage and interact with the user interface. But I don't think that's usually in terms of novelty. You don't want someone to feel this is completely new. I, at one point, used a product called Act 2000, I think it was, back just before 2000. And on the cover of the box that the software came in, it said, you know, completely novel user interface. I thought, I don't want something novel. I want it to use all the existing elements that I'm familiar with. If something is new, then it's unfamiliar by definition. And certainly within software, within the code itself, if you decide I'm going to write completely novel software, I won't follow the naming conventions that anyone else does. I will use names that have nothing to do with what they do, what the method accomplishes, etc. I will create my own design patterns that look nothing like anything that's gone before. There should be an aspect of newness. If you're just reinventing the wheel, that's not great either. But novelty in itself, there's a balancing act between, is this usefully novel or is it new for the sake of it? So that's thoughts around art. Around craft, well, I'm going to define it today, and all of these are definitions that are woolly, no pun intended with the ball of wool here, and may well be different to your understanding of art, craft, and engineering, and that's fine. I'm absolutely not trying to say these are the right definitions and yours are wrong. Quite the opposite. You define them however you want and go away and think about what that difference means in terms of software engineering. You know, how does it manifest itself within teams, within what we do? But for today, I'm saying that craft is a hard-won skill that allows art, or engineering in a minute, to be implemented. So there's a fuzzy boundary between the art of, say, API design and the craft of it. You could think of it as being the art is the result and the craft is the process you have to go through. And it's all tricky, but it does require conscious study and time. If there's something that someone can just be naturally, immediately good at without studying it at all, I don't think that's really craft necessarily. Now, that's not to say that there is no such thing as natural ability, but I think there's a lot to do with how you apply yourself and who you learn from and how you learn. And just as I don't have the art of Miro, I don't have the ideas that would be composed just right. And I can't come up with in my head a new thing that would look a bit like Miro, but has new ideas and would still feel like art. I also don't have the craft. I don't know how to do etching. My kids are doing etching at school at the moment, and I envy them because I haven't done it. And I would quite like to know how Miro came up with all of these things and try it for myself. But to do it to a professional level is another level. Within coding, we have craft as well, and we have all kinds of things I mentioned earlier on that I've got loads of books in the office that I need to go and pick up at some point. And I should let you into a little secret. Half of the software engineering books I've got, I certainly haven't read to completion. I've dipped in some of them I've been given for free, and some of those I've read, so I haven't. I think you can only go so far with books. Now, I'm an author. Obviously, I think books are useful, but they're not the be-all and end-all. And if you read a book and don't try to apply it, that's really not going to be helpful. Equally, just showing up at the office, coding for 8 hours without thinking about it and then going home, that's not improving your craft either. Now, I'm not saying you need to be working longer hours. I'm saying that while you're coding, there should be a part of you, 10% of you should be looking at what process you're going through and saying, is this something familiar? Was I doing the same task last week? And is there room for automation or abstracting things out to use inheritance or whatever it is? Is there some way that I can improve my craft of how I'm achieving whatever I'm doing? And part of that can also be through pairing and mentoring. If you have someone else with you who's done something similar for the last 10 years, then why would you not lean on their experience? Likewise, if you are someone who's been doing something for the last 10 years, not only should you lend your experience to those who haven't, you should also listen to their feedback, because you've probably got set in your ways. I certainly would come into that camp myself. And so if someone says, why are you doing that? Don't immediately just go, well, that's the way we've always done it. It would be too hard to change now. It's like, is there a good reason? Maybe there is a good reason, and that's a time to, impart that knowledge, impart that experience. Yeah, we tried it that other way that sounds a bit more obvious, but it turns out that story comes here, and it's always best as a story. Or maybe you need to reevaluate. Okay, well, we did it for these reasons. Some of those reasons may have gone away. We did it because back in the day we only had 300k to work with, but now we've got much more memory. And I'm not saying we should be wasteful with resources, but some of the hard constraints may be less hard now. So do share with each other. Finally, engineering. So we've talked about art, we've talked about craft. And engineering is a word that many people have difficulties with and don't like as a term applied to software, either because they are used to what engineering means elsewhere, and it is slightly different in software. There is less of a we've done this before, so we can apply known algorithms, etc. You're naturally always doing something a bit novel in software, because otherwise you just use the previous program. Whereas if you're building another bridge that's quite similar to a bridge before, you're still applying engineering and craft, but it's in a slightly more rigid way, slightly more objective way. And I'm using the term engineering here to talk about the more objective side of software engineering. So, or software development. So it still involves skill, but where art is quite subjective, someone else could say, I don't like link to XML at all because of these reasons. And I'd say, okay, well, that's fine. I don't object to those reasons as much as you do. These are the reasons I do like link to XML, but it would be subjective. I wouldn't expect to be able to necessarily persuade someone that link to XML is great, or for them to persuade me that it's not. Whereas for the engineering side, I think we can be a bit more objective. I'm thinking about benchmarking and tests and continuous integration, build automation, all kinds of things. There is still a subjective aspect to it. You're going to be balancing how much effort am I putting in now versus I can scale it out without having to put effort in later, versus well, I can put less effort in now, scale it out manually and learn as I'm going and then apply it back. There are definitely subjective areas, but you learn through craft how to apply that subjectivity, and you do tend to end up with something objective at the end. So I've somewhat waffly introduced art, craft, and engineering. And now for the rest of the talk, we will try to apply these ideas and explore where those ideas are relevant within the bounds of the musical and that first set of lines. So if you remember, it was the challenge is to bring order to the whole through design, composition, tension, balance, light, and harmony. And I'll just digress very slightly to why I've come up with this talk in the first place. I've been giving this talk for a few years now, but I've been thinking about it for well over a decade, probably a decade and a half. Because to me, software engineering is always about bringing order to the whole. It's about starting with that blank page or canvas and bringing something new to life. And sometimes it can feel chaotic, but we're trying to bring order to it. And obviously, design and composition have some very obvious meanings within software, and we'll explore those. Tension, balance, light, and harmony. I hope I'll be able to persuade you that those apply within our world as well. So we'll start off with design. And I should say that design and composition form the bulk of what's coming, but we will talk about all the rest as well. So the word design is overloaded, and the first use that we'll talk about here is intentional decisions. Something that is by design is the opposite of by accident. So there could be some behavior of an API or a library that isn't what you want, but it could still be by design. The person who designed the library wanted it to behave that way. It was an intentional decision. In Sunday in the Park with George, the artist, is always deliberate, but it's the more spontaneous character of Dot who highlights the importance of making decisions. So, as I mentioned, she was originally in the musical, had George as a boyfriend, and then later moved on to Louis the Baker. And at one point she sings, "I chosen, my world was shaken, so what? The choice may have been mistaken, the choosing was not, you have to move on." And the idea of moving on comes in the second half as well. But this idea that you can make a decision and it may be the wrong one, but it's still better to make the decision than not do it at all, is an important one in software. I would ask, and normally if we were in person, I would ask for a show of hands. How many of you have been sometimes paralyzed by indecision in your coding life? You don't know whether to make something a class or a struct. You don't know which design pattern out of some options to apply. You don't know quite which of a few options you will take. And one of the interesting aspects of software, unlike Dot choosing between Louis the Baker or Georges, both of whom had their positive points, their negative points as well, but both would be good options. In software, I tend to find that you're always, when you're making a choice, it's between two options that you don't really want either of them. And there's the meme about them, looking both ways. Simon Pegg, I seem to remember. You don't want to take either option because they're both ugly in some way, and you just don't want to. The downsides are large, and some of them, and some of them just feel wrong. It's never, I will choose this beautiful path or this beautiful path, and either way, I know I will be happy. Now, you have to place your bets and hope that you've chosen the least worst path. But one of the key software traits is that software changes over time. There are some decisions that can be postponed, some decisions that can be reversed, and some that will no longer be relevant later on. So just to give some examples of this, sometimes, suppose you're designing a library that will be used by your publishing open source. If you have a public type and you think, no, I'm going to make that internal in whatever language construct that means for you, so that it's not exposed in the public API surface, then certain aspects, so the name of the type itself, the methods or functions on it, etc., those decisions can be changed. You've sort of postponed making those decisions or making them concrete, because later on you can change your mind. Some of them you may find you've chosen particular method names, but later on you actually find you can get rid of the type entirely, and so those decisions are effectively null and void. They're removed. And it's important to understand, whenever you make a decision, what scope you're in. Is this a decision which can never ever be changed, or can only be changed once per major version? So maybe you've got an idea that you'll have a major version cadence of once every couple of years. That sort of seems reasonable. If you're asking people to make breaking changes to their code, if they're consuming your library, asking people to do that once every couple of years is not unreasonable. Asking them to do it every 3 months would be much less reasonable. If you're having a whole company name change, that's really, really hard, and you definitely don't want to do that terribly often, losing all the benefits of your previous branding, etc., etc. On the other hand, there can be some things, if you're writing a private internal tool that only you will ever be using, you could change your mind tomorrow. It won't make any difference. So understanding that level of stickiness of the decision is important. Sometimes you don't even know that you are taking decisions. Sometimes you obviously do. If you are naming a product, that's obviously a decision that you are making. But what about when you're just writing code? Here's a method declaration. What decisions have we made here? So the first three are obvious. This is a void method. It doesn't return anything. And for the moment, I'll think about in C#. We'll come to Java in a minute. If you don't know either C# or Java, apologies. Hopefully you can sort of take away, you can guess what things mean to some extent. So this is a void method. It doesn't return anything. It's called foo. That's a decision. And it doesn't have any parameters. So the parameter list in brackets is empty. 3 decisions. Fine. But there are a bunch of other ones. This is an instance method. It doesn't have the static modifier. It's not an unsafe method, as in it doesn't have the unsafe modifier, even though it could be in an unsafe context. It's not a virtual method, and it's a private method. So if you imagine we change that to public static, I suppose it can't be static and virtual, but either public virtual unsafe void foo or public static unsafe void foo. We've just changed a bunch of decisions. When you write that code, how many of those decisions are you really conscious that you have made? 2 of those, particularly virtual and private, are really interesting because in C# they're different from the results in Java. So I could write the same method. I would probably write it with a lowercase f instead of a capital F because of different naming conventions, but I could write the same method in Java. And it would mean subtly different things. It would mean package private instead of private, and it would be virtual because the default is to use the virtual methods in Java. Java and C# are sufficiently similar languages that many of the design choices you make should be similar. If you were porting a library from Java to C# or vice versa, you would normally, if a method is virtual in one, it should be virtual in the other. So you would expect, if you looked at large swathes of code, statistically significant amounts of code, you would expect to see the same proportion of methods being virtual or non-virtual in Java and C#, I would think. My experience is not that. My experience is that most of the time, people will go with the defaults if they have any reason not to. So you'll see a lot more package private methods in Java than you will internal methods within C#. You'll see a lot more virtual methods in Java than in C#. Some people habitually make things virtual in C# as well. That's personally not my approach. And even if I'm writing Java, I will try to make methods final if I can, because I tend to either design for composition or prohibit it. I wish that the default, another default, in both C# and Java would be for classes to be final or sealed, depending on the language you're using, so that you have to explicitly say, I want this to be inheritable from. I want to be able to create subclasses. But people do go with the default, which suggests that they aren't thinking about all those decisions and taking them consciously. Otherwise, we'd end up with more people using final methods in Java, for example, I suspect. So you could say to yourself, well, maybe there shouldn't be any defaults. Maybe you should explicitly have to say, this is an instance method or it's a static method. This is a private method or whatever. Unfortunately, it ends up being very, very long-winded at that point, potentially. So the fact that you can't say instance method in either Java or C#, it's static or nothing, as it were, makes it harder to be explicit, but also harder to, also briefer. If we made every method declaration explicit in every aspect, including safe and instance and private, etc., then method declarations would be much longer. There is a mantra in some API design and certainly some user interface design of don't make me think. And I would like to say that for user interface design, maybe that's appropriate. And for some elements of API design, it's appropriate. in my NodeTime library, for those of you not in the .NET world or who just haven't used NodeTime, NodeTime was based originally on JodaTime, which was a Java date and time library that came along. It was the precursor to Java.time. NodeTime takes a lot of the ideas, but has a new API over it because there were elements I didn't like about the other API, the JodaTime API, and by now quite a different implementation. But early on, I very consciously took the decision that I would avoid things being implicit as far as possible. So where in other APIs, whether that's .NET's DateTime API or other languages, things will implicitly use your system local time zone, or they'll implicitly use your system clock. Both of those you have to state very explicitly in NodeTime. There is one place where it will implicitly use the system clock, and that's if it has to guess at what a particular time zone means. Hardly ever will that be used. But I want people to think, I want people to take decisions around their date time code and make those explicit, put them on the page, because then it's clear what that decision is when you're reading the code. Now, I'm not trying to make things difficult. I'm trying to make things explicit and conscious. So when you have taken that decision, I want to use, partly in terms of what type of data you're using. Are you talking about an instant of time and the calendar system and time zone don't matter at all, which is fine for timestamps, for example? Or are you trying to schedule a meeting so you actually want to know which time zone it's in, or attach a time zone to a local date and time? And if so, well, if you ever need that to be unambiguous, you might need to say how you'll resolve daylight saving time changes, for example. So we don't do things automatically for you, but I work very hard to try to make it as easy as possible to express the decisions that you have made and try to make things obviously wrong where they can be. So as an example of the obviously wrong, take DateTime in .NET has an add seconds method. And it sounds like you should be able to do DateTime now equals DateTime.now, and then now.add seconds 5 as a statement. And that sounds like it should add 5 seconds. But it doesn't. It returns a new DateTime with 5 seconds added to it. That code doesn't look wrong. You need to know what the add method does before it reads wrongly. In NodeTime, the same code, I won't go into how we get now, but you need to be quite deliberate about which clock you want to use, whether that's the system clock or something else. Instead of add seconds, there would be plus seconds. And now.plus seconds 5 just sounds wrong. It sounds like, well, now plus 5, well, what does that, what am I doing with the result? And so if you don't assign the result to anything, it's fairly obvious that you're losing information. So just subtle naming to try to make it easy to do the right thing and hard to do the wrong thing are aspects of the design of NodeTime that I've tried to focus on. Let's talk a little around versioning. So I've been very interested in versioning for the last few years, and this comes back to understanding the scope of a decision. Between stable expectations and committing to a course of action, it's really hard to decide when to go to 1.0. This is the scariest number in software engineering for me, because when you've gone to 1.0, people expect it to be stable, and that's entirely reasonable. You're trying to communicate that stability via the version number. I have a whole other talk about versioning, and if any of you have played the game Hanabi, how that relates to versioning in terms of trying to communicate as much information as possible using just tiny amounts of actual data. A version number is quite short considering how much information you're trying to convey. But it's definitely a decision you need to make. And sometimes you will want to record decisions and reasons for them. I mentioned earlier on, if you're working with someone who's done something similar for the last 10 years, they may know if you look at something that looks odd, you can ask them why they've done it. Hopefully they will have a record of that. Unfortunately, you can't make all your decisions. You can't take notes about all of your decisions because there just isn't enough time in the day. You can, in some cases, make it clear that you have been explicitly making a decision rather than it being implicit. So when it comes to the access modifiers we saw earlier on, I will usually write, or hopefully always, but sometimes I forget, I will write private void foo instead of just void foo to show this is intentional. It isn't just an accident that it's private. This is intentional. But you can't document every decision. You can leave a breadcrumb trail of the most important bits. And as an example of this, Eric Lippert dived into some of the meeting notes from the C# language design meetings in some of his blog posts. It was really interesting to see, okay, well, there's this new feature coming up here, but we can't break this old feature. Why was this old feature designed in this particular way? Let's go back to the meeting notes and figure out why. And of course, one of the decisions you need to make is, why am I recording some of these decisions or the reasons behind some decisions and not recording others? And sometimes you may even want to record the reason why you're recording some things and not others. So it's decisions all the way down. Slightly different aspect of design is in terms of representation. So I talked earlier on about how the musical has different layers of myth and reality, and you know that you're watching actors, but you're trying to believe that they're the real characters, but you're probably not trying to believe that they're the real people because you know it's fictionalized, and at some point you're watching a character move around other characters and then form a painting from it, and you know that's an artistic license type thing. The art is trying to represent something. In terms of the abstract art, like the Miros, what's being represented isn't as clear. It's more feelings and abstract notions rather than this is a river, etc. And the intention of art isn't usually to represent something purely accurately. If you wanted to get an idea of what a Sunday afternoon on the island of Le Grand Jatte looks like, you could take a photograph and you could even arrange that and do composition, which we'll come into in a minute, to make it attractive. But it wouldn't be art in the same way that the painting is art. There are elements of the way that something is represented that are interesting. This is not to say that photos themselves can't be art, of course, but the aspect of representing something in a different way is somewhat particular to when you are mimicking it to some extent. What does all this have to do with software? Well, not design in terms of design patterns that we normally think about, but modeling. So you can look at the statue on the left here, and that is an attempted accurate representation. It really does look like a person, very, very heavily crafted, and maybe looks like an idealized person rather than an actual person that the sculptor was able to model. But in software, we tend to try to simplify. So we might take a person and say, well, that's someone with a head, 2 arms and 2 legs. And that is worth noting is an ableist representation that assumes that every person has 2 arms and 2 legs. No, we know that's not the case, but we're potentially simplifying. And sometimes that simplification can be justified, sometimes it can be problematic. This whole point of representation is made in the second half of Sunday in the Park with George. Marie, who is Dot and George's daughter, is looking at the painting and sings, "The child is so sweet and the girls are so rapturous. Isn't it lovely how artists can capture us?" And as software engineers, we are capturing aspects of the world and simplifying them. We know we're simplifying because the world is too complex to be captured in simple software models. And sometimes it can go wrong. I'll give one example of how I thought I could simplify something, and it turns out that it was oversimplifying. It may still have been the right decision, but it doesn't represent all of reality. So let's take a date. As in, today is, for me, the 28th of October in the year 2021 in the Gregorian calendar. And in the Julian calendar system, it would be slightly different. In, I won't say the Islamic calendar because there are multiple Islamic calendars. They would have different month, day, and year. They wouldn't even use the same month names. The Hebrew calendar system, different again. But in all cases, there would be a year, a month, and a day within that month. So I thought that capturing calendar system, year, month, day would be sufficient to represent a date in any calendar system. Great. We may not know the range, so you might want to expect that months are always, within a range of 1 to 13, and I'll dash that hope in a minute. You might have a range of years that your software cares about, but you assume that it's always day, month, year. And then you come across the Baha'i or Wondrous calendar system, which has months, days, and years. It has 19 months in every year and 19 days in every month, which leaves you to 361 days in a year. Unfortunately, we know that there aren't just 365 days in a year. 361 days in a year. So in order to be closer to the solar calendar, the Baha'i calendar has some days of wonder. I think it's 5 or 6 each year. Maybe it's 4 or 5. And those days of wonder are not in any month. So you sort of want month to be nullable, so optional, if you want to represent the Baha'i calendar system. But that's really difficult for all the rest of the software in the world that wants to be able to assume a month at all times. So this was new to me a few years ago when the Wondrous calendar system, we had a feature request and someone implemented it, but said, I would like to be able to represent a date not having a month. It's like, well, that doesn't really fit in with the model that I've got because my model is slightly too simplistic. If I could start Node time again, I would make the same decision because the number of users using the Baha'i calendar system is going to be very, very small, quite possibly the one user who's implemented it. His applications may well have more users, of course, and trying to meet his requirements would make the world much harder for the 99.9% of people who aren't using the Baha'i calendar system. But it really struck home to me how we can make assumptions without even realizing we're making them sometimes. Let's move on to composition. So there are many aspects to composition, and all code is composition to some extent. We make big things from small things, or we solve a big problem by dividing it into small problems. And we add value by considering how to combine things. So we can take two things, put them together, and the sum is greater than, the value overall is greater than the sum of the parts. And that choice provides value in both code and art. In the painting, there's composition in terms of the individual brushstrokes leading to colors that may be visible to us, but are actually combined of different colors. So small things combine to form recognizable entities, even you wouldn't be able to tell just from looking at the small version what it's going to form. And if you want to see this in practice, you can watch Ferris Bueller's Day Off, where Cameron looks at this picture in the Chicago Institute of Art and zooms right into the center. And you can use the Google Cultural Institute website to do the same thing. And you can really zoom into the individual strands of canvas and the brushstrokes with on top of them. There's also composition in a more conventional artistic way in terms of placement and sizing, how some characters in the painting of Sunday Afternoon on the Island of Granjat are larger than others, so they draw your eye more. You're drawn mostly, I would say, to the right-hand side, where there are the woman with the umbrella in particular, who is Dot in the musical, and the boatman on the left-hand side. And there are smaller people, but they're further away, but they're composed nicely, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in terms of lighting. But as well as that aspect, if I quickly nip back to slide 4, you can see that there's composition in terms of the framing of the painting. So the main picture is within a small border that is also painted and was painted later by Sura. That is another element of composition, and obviously the whole thing is within a frame, and when you see it, you would see it within on a wall. So these are all aspects of composition, and I'll come back to that a little bit more in terms of harmony and how we play roles within teams later on. But there are these different aspects of composition. Within code, wrong. There we go. Within code, there are some obvious forms of composition and some slightly less obvious. So a whole program is combined of lots of individual characters. So the characters turn into lexical tokens that form into statements, and the statements form into methods, the methods form into types, the types form into libraries, the libraries form into systems, those systems combine into bigger systems. And you've got these days the concepts of microservices and single responsibility principle, and those are all around composition. The scalability and reliability are achieved through solid engineering principles. So you might think that composition is all about engineering, and you just decide objectively where the single responsibility lies, and then that's where you make a boundary. In my experience, there's a lot more craft involved there, and even some art. It is not always obvious where to have the borders, where to expose things and where not to. Within composition as well, I mentioned we have statements forming methods, etc. There's also the composition of multiple objects together, or multiple aspects of data together. So, for example, we could have the idea of a start instant and an end instant, and when you combine them together, you have an interval, and you can add constraints on that. So the start has to be before or equal to the end, maybe. And you can add the naming, so that the names of start and end clearly are meaningful. If I gave you something that was just called type 1, and it had properties of instant 1 and instant 2, that doesn't tell you anything. If I call it an interval with names of start and end, that adds value. So not only am I able to then provide extra things where those interact, so I can find the length of the interval, for example, or I could add the interval onto something else. So there are other operations you can have with combined data types, but just the fact that you are saying, here is a data type, that conveys some information. It implies that this is a useful composition, a useful combination. And for this, I want to go to a different musical by Stephen Sondheim and James Lapine called Into the Woods. And the witch at one point near the end says, "Children will look to you for which way to turn, to learn what to be. Careful before you say, listen to me. Children will listen. Careful the tale you tell, that is the spell." If you expose a composition within a library, you are saying this is a useful abstraction, a useful composition. Careful before you do that. Make sure it really is useful general purpose, rather than, well, I wanted to be able to return something from one method that had these two aspects. If it's only useful in that one respect, should it be a public composed type? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. I need to speed on. The other aspect of composition that I'll come to is around composing operations. So both link and async and await in .NET have this property where you have the one abstraction, whether it's an awaitable operation or a task of T most of the time, or in link, a sequence of elements. And you say, well, what can I do with a sequence of elements? I could filter it, and what I get back is a sequence of elements. I could order it, and I get back a sequence of elements, possibly with some indication that it's ordered. I could project it, which would give a sequence of different type of elements. And all of these things, because sequence of elements is the core abstraction, you can filter and then project and then sort, or you could sort and then filter and then project. All of these things work together. Likewise, if you've got something that can be awaited, and you usually implement that with an async method, which can in turn await other things or even recursively call itself and await the result of that recursion, you end up with a system which composes nicely. If the result of an async method were not itself awaitable, then there'd be an awful lot more friction going on. This is all part of the course for functional programmers, of course, and you may be reaching for the word monad at this point. I'm not going to talk about monads beyond saying that I don't really understand them fully. I can feel around the edges, I can see where they're providing value, and I can grasp at the value, just as I can appreciate the beauty of a Miro painting without really knowing the background deeply. And I'm sure I would be enriched by knowing the background of both monads and Miros more, but it sort of eludes me. Let's move on from design and composition to tension and balance. And I have put these together because I'm cheating. This is something where in art, tension can provide value, a benefit. And I'll give you an example of that. In the first chords of Sunday in the Park with George, there you've got on the stage trees flying in as George says through design, composition, tension, balance, light, and harmony. As things happen, you get different chords coming in. And I hadn't noticed before I read a book going into the detail of this, that there is something unsatisfying about those chords. They're split chords, sort of arpeggios. And it doesn't feel quite right until George says harmony, and that final chord feels right. And it turns out that all of the previous arpeggios are missing the bottom note, the natural ground of that chord, split chord, and it's present on the last of them. And the impact of this on the audience is we're building up, there's tension, there's more tension, and we relax when we finally hear the chord with everything that's meant to be there. So that's a good thing. But I would say that tension in software is very rarely a good thing. Instead, we seek balance. And it's usually balance about competing demands. Maybe it's time, different projects here. I'm up to my eyeballs in several different things. Which of them am I going to do later today? Maybe it's paying down technical debt versus new features. There's all kinds of things. I've mentioned, what do you make public? What do you keep internal? That is attention. The more you make public, the more people can use it, but the less you can change it later on. And the more people have to learn. There are all kinds of balancing acts to have. I would say the most important of these is a work-life balance. And this is a direct theme of the musical, because Georges sacrifices a traditional personal life for the sake of art. His art is the basis of his personal life. And he's got a song, Finishing the Hat, which really explores this. And I think it would ring true notes to many software engineers. At one point he sings, finishing the hat, how you have to finish the hat, how you watch the rest of the world from a window while you finish the hat. You're aware that outside your office, your shed, your wherever you're working, other things are happening, but you're so in the zone that you're not part of that world at the moment. You're just focusing. And at the end, there's another thing that really rings true for me. He sings, "Look, I made a hat where there never was a hat." He's come up with something out of nothing, and I'm sure you've all had the joy of starting file, new project, or whatever you do in your development environment. You have nothing there, and then by the end of the day or end of the month or year, you've got a working application. You have created something out of nothing, usually standing on the shoulders of giants, but creating something out of nothing, and it's beautiful and it's wonderful. Do we have to sacrifice our personal lives for that? Do we have to sacrifice our families? Do we have to ask our partners to do most of the child rearing while we're busy in the zone? Absolutely not. There can be much more healthy family working within software engineering, I'm absolutely sure, and we will be happier and I believe more productive as well. Okay, 4 minutes left. Light, I will talk very briefly about this because I want to come to Harmony. In terms of light, if you're looking at some fine art, if there is no light, you cannot see anything. If we were in the same room together, then we would all be seeing the same slide here, but it might look quite different in terms of color to when I did it at did the same talk at a different venue, because the projector would give different qualities of light. Sura thought of himself as well as an artist, as a bit of a scientist. He was trying to blend light in the viewer's eye. And if any of you have read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, there's aspects of the quality debate around that. But it was definitely experimental. Within software engineering, I would say that light is around transparency and openness, and how that applies to your product, your team, etc., is something that I don't really have time to go into now. But I would say a couple of things. There is room for keeping things private. We're all familiar with the arguments for privacy. I don't think any of us would want all our data made available, all the data that Google, Facebook, etc. have on us. If that were all completely public and out in the open, we'd be in a much more transparent society. I don't think that would actually be a good thing. But likewise, a deluge of data is like a blinding light. We can have too much information for it to actually be useful. So make decisions, going back to design, around how much information you want to put out, whether it's about you or your product or your users or whatever. Make sure it's appropriate information and useful. More data isn't always useful. Okay, most important slide in the whole deck for me is harmony. We talked a couple of minutes ago about balance being the compromise between elements that were in tension, this project or that project. Harmony is still, you've got different elements, different people working, different projects, whatever it is, but instead of them competing with each other, they improve each other. And this is particularly relevant of people. And you can think of this in terms of music and an orchestra, where in an orchestra, if everyone played their loudest, competing with each other, it would be a horrible din. You need to know when to be quiet, when to be loud. The conductor can help you in a good team. You will have a team lead who wants to make sure they hear the opinions of everyone appropriately. In a really good team, it can be self-correcting, and team member A can say, I want to hear the opinions of team member B on this, and we'll stop team member C from talking over them, etc. It's also better, just as I love brass band music, but there is more to life than just one kind of music. So a full orchestra has a richer sound than just brass or just a string quartet, lovely as those things are on their own. So I believe we need diversity in our teams, diversity of worldview, of thinking, of experience, and we can produce better software that way. I would go on for quite a long time around the benefits of diversity, but we are very short of time. I will just leave you with this thought, that you are singing a melody from your life. That melody is someone else's harmony. It's providing the background along with all the other people's melodies. That provides the harmony to that person's melody. Let's really work to make all our melodies sing together and sound beautiful. It's difficult, Really, really hard, much harder than writing code, but it's also much more important. I hope I've convinced you that we're lucky to work in a mixture of creativity and engineering, art, craft, engineering, all good things that we can enjoy together. I hope I've tried to convince you that software is artistic but grounded in engineering. I really hope I've convinced you that software is more than just the bits, that there are human interactions at the heart of all of this. I'll end the same way that the musical ends, because we can always do more. White, a blank page or canvas, his favourite. So many possibilities. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, John. That was very insightful, beautiful, and I'd say melodious. And really, so it really gave me and viewers a new side and a way of looking at software that we build.
Good.
All right, people, we are open for questions, and if you have any, you can drop them in the chat box. By the time we have audience questions, I myself had a few questions for you. If
Mhm.
happy to answer those. So first question would be uh, on the topic of over engineering things. So this thing is, just give me a minute. Yeah, so this thing is what I usually do while designing something and developing something. So while making something new, people tend to over-engineer it by thinking that it would be useful at some point of time.
Yeah.
But as a result, it creates more havoc or increases the timeline of a project, or it increases the complexity for the users to use the software itself, which diverts the main purpose of the entire project. So what are your views on that particular topic?
So I mostly come against this when it comes to automation, where I will come across teams who want to automate everything right from the start before they know how to do the process manually. And I tend to say, do you know what? I'm happy to do the same thing 10 times and get really good at it. And by the time it's extremely boring, I know how to do it. I know all the corner cases, and then I can automate it. So that's one element, and sometimes you don't need to automate at all because you're happy to do something. If it only happens once every 6 months or something and takes you 10 minutes to do, then it's not worth spending weeks automating that. Over engineering in general, I think it's about making decisions consciously, as I mentioned before, and finding the balance and being aware that if you add a feature, it can constrain what features you can add later on. I'm not saying I have a silver bullet here. I don't have any magic wand that can stop us from over engineering, but being aware of it, and anytime you think I'll put this in because it might be useful, well, at least try to hide it so that maybe now's a good time to implement something because you're in the zone for that particular area of code, but you could keep it private, or you could commit it and then delete it again and have that commit in source control without it sort of invading the rest of the space. Being very aware of how much will it cost to change this decision later on can avoid over engineering, I think.
Right, makes sense. Our next question is from Vikram Singh. uh, Vikram asks, what is the right balance of commenting in code versus variables name which are self-explanatory?
So there are two kinds of comments. There are public API reference comments. So things that you will see if you look at the API reference documentation on the web later on for a library. And I personally think it's worth documenting everything there. Everything that's part of your public API surface should have documentation, even if it's fairly brief. Internally, I would always put some time into trying to pick a sensible variable name that gives some of the meaning of things. Where I tend to write comments within the code, within the implementation, they're not usually about what a variable represents. It can be that, and that could be certainly for instance variables and static variables, fields rather than local variables. That can make a lot of sense, particularly for things like if you've got a map, then document what it's a map from and to, because that can be very hard to put just in the variable name. I tend to keep comments within a method implementation for reasons why I'm doing something rather than what I'm doing. And it's usually if that why is because of something unexpected. So if I'm retrying a particular sleeping, as an example, I was recently writing some code for our church AV system and sending messages to the mixer to request what the current volume level is. And I found that if I just spam the mixer with requests, it drops a load of them on the floor. So I've added a little sleep, which is rarely a good idea and seems a bit weird in code. So I've said why. This sleep seems to be a reasonable balance that means that the requests for the mixer do get responses without it taking too long. So explaining why any code is odd is definitely worth doing in comments, but anything that can be easily made obvious within the code of what you're doing. I hate comments that are sort of add 1 to x. Well, if I've got x++, I know what that means. It's, assume people can read the code, and if the code is too hard to read at that what it's doing level, then try to rewrite the code before you add comments. There can be definitely sometimes you can restructure the code to break a long method into multiple smaller methods, and that can be much clearer than just commenting the large method, for example, because effectively you're providing those comments by the method names and parameters provide more context of what you're doing and why. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much for your time. I haven't looked at the schedule to see what's coming next.
I'm audible now. Hello,
Hello?
John. I'm audible.
So I didn't quite hear what you said there, but we are still live, I believe.
Input बंद हो गया. John, I'm audible. All right. I'm sorry. So I was asking, what is what are your scope of defining scope of a project before starting with it?
How do I define the scope of a project? I think I probably need more context to even start to answer that question, to be honest. But I don't think I have any particular insight beyond what the rest of you have, as it were. It's not something I consider myself expert in at all. But I would say that paying some attention to within a large project, how you can break it into small, somewhat independent projects, or clearly delineate some dependencies, is definitely useful. Even if you can implement something just in .NET, implement a whole solution in one project, it can also be very useful to split those up to help you have the discipline of separation of concerns.
Uh, so let's just wrap it up here. And we had a great session with you today. I hope we get to see you again sometime in the future with more content regarding the same topic or new topics if you have any. We'll see you around.
Okay, thank you. Hope you have a lovely rest of your conference. Bye, folks.
Yeah. Bye bye. Great, folks. So we had a great session from John. Now we'll be wrapping up this session of speakers as of now. We will be back again at 5:30 with some excellent topics and speakers. I hope you to see you around there again. So that's all for now. I'll see you around.